The snow was still untouched when I saw him standing by my father's grave, his hat in his hands. He didn't turn when I stopped behind him, as if he already knew I was there. When he finally spoke, he said my father's name the way only family ever had. I grew up in a small town where winter stayed longer than it should and silence settled early each evening. My father had been buried there for 3 years, and grief had learned to live quietly inside me, like a lamp left on in an empty room. I came to the cemetery that morning for no reason I could explain, only to find a stranger waiting, as though the past had finally decided to speak. The snow was new enough to still be listening. It lay smooth across the cemetery, unmarked, holding the pale blue of early morning. I stopped at the gate and breathed once, the cold filling my chest like glass. That's when I saw him. He stood near my father's grave, dark coat against all that white, not bent over the stone, not reading a name, just standing there, still, like he was waiting for something to arrive. I hadn't planned to come so early. Winter mornings usually keep me inside, wrapped in excuses, but something had pulled me out before the sun, before the town had fully woken. The sky was thin and colorless, and even the birds had stayed quiet. I told myself I would leave if anyone else was there. Instead, I stayed. I watched him from a distance. The way his shoulders slopped, the way his breath showed, then vanished. He shifted his weight once, slow, like his body was older than his face. That's when I noticed his hands, bare, red from the cold, trembling. Just slightly, as if the cold had reached something deeper. I took a step forward, then stopped. The snow crunched too loudly beneath my boot, and the sound felt like a mistake. I thought about turning back, letting the moment pass. Some things feel private even when they're happening in public, but my father's name was carved into the stone he stood beside. That made it mine. As I walked closer, the air felt thicker, each step slower than the last. He didn't turn, didn't look startled. It was as if he had already decided I would come up close. I saw how close he stood to the grave, not on the path. In the snow itself, leaving footprints that crossed mine from years ago. The stone was clean, brushed free of frost. Someone had already done that. I cleared my throat, but the sound barely carried. He shifted again, hands tightening together. Still, he didn't look at me. I didn't mean to interrupt, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. He nodded once. A small movement. Careful. Then he spoke, low, like he didn't want the ground to hear. I was hoping you'd come, he said. That was when he turned. His face held something familiar, though I couldn't place it. The kind of familiarity that doesn't belong to memory, but to recognition. He looked tired. Not from travel, from holding something too long. He glanced back at the stone, then at me. Snow began to fall again. Soft this time, filling the spaces between us. I knew your father, he said. The words settled slowly. Not heavy, just deep. I looked at the grave, then back at him. The snow kept falling, quiet and steady, already covering the path behind me. The wind moved through the cemetery like it was looking for somewhere to settle. It brushed past us, lifting the loose snow from the stones, whispering against coats and sleeves. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, he did. His voice came out low, careful, like he was testing whether the air would hold it. I knew your father, he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed on the ground, on the uneven snow near the headstone. I watched his mouth instead, the way the words left him slowly, like they'd been waiting their turn. I nodded, though I wasn't sure why. People said things like that sometimes. Neighbors, old co-workers, men who once shared a fence or a drink and mistook proximity for knowing, but something in his voice didn't reach for familiarity. It carried weight. He shifted his hands together, rubbing them once for warmth. Then he said, he always smelled like oil and pine. The sentence landed harder than it should have. I felt it in my chest before I felt it in my thoughts. My father worked with his hands, engines, wood, sap and grease under his nails. No matter how hard he scrubbed, that smell lived in our coats. Our truck, the corners of the house. It wasn't something you guessed. It was something you remembered. The stranger swallowed, still didn't look at me, and he whistled. He added, "Never quite right. Always a note off." I closed my eyes without meaning to. I could hear it suddenly. That thin, wandering tune drifting through the garage, through the kitchen when he thought no one was listening. I used to tease him for it. He'd smile, but not with his eyes. When I opened my eyes again, the cemetery felt different, smaller, closer, like the ground had leaned in. I studied the stranger's face, the lines near his mouth, the tired set of his jaw. He looked like someone who had rehearsed this alone many times, someone who hadn't decided whether he was allowed to say more. How? The word caught. I tried again. How did you know him? He breathed out slowly, a long release. As if he'd been holding that breath for years. There are things you don't forget, he said, even when you try. He finally looked at me then, just for a second. Long enough for me to see something unguarded pass across his face, not grief, something closer to gratitude, or debt. The silence stretched again. Snow settled on our shoulders, on the top of the stone, on the space between us. He shifted his weight, glancing back at the grave, then at me, like he was asking without words. "I can stop," he said quietly, "if you want." I looked at my father's name carved into the stone. The dates. How final they still felt. Then I looked back at the stranger. The truth standing in his hands. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please, keep going." The gate groaned when I pushed it open. Old iron. The sound carried farther than it should have in the cold. Like the cemetery didn't want us to leave just yet. Snow slipped from the bars in soft clumps, landing at our feet. Neither of us spoke. Our breath did the talking for us. We walked side by side down the narrow path, our boots pressing new marks into the morning. The snow answered each step with a dull crunch. Steady and patient. It reminded me how loud quiet things can be when nothing else is awake. The road beyond the cemetery lay empty. No cars. No movement. Just the pale stretch of winter holding everything in place. "I've been here a while," he said at last. His voice didn't turn toward me. It stayed straight ahead, aimed at the road, passing through. He added, "For weeks." I glanced at him, but he kept walking, hands stuck deep into his coat pockets, waiting. He said it like that explained everything. "For what?" I asked. He shrugged once. A small movement, almost apologetic. "The right morning." I didn't press him. Some answers don't arrive when you ask for them. They show up when they're ready. We reached the edge of the cemetery where the snow thinned and gravel began to show through. The town sat beyond it, still asleep, smoke barely rising from a few chimneys. I thought of other winters. The first one after my father died. How the house felt too big then. How time stretched and thinned, days passing without weight. I remembered mornings when the silence felt permanent, when grief didn't hurt so much as it emptied. I'd thought that part was over, that the cold had finally loosened its grip. Walking beside him, I wasn't so sure. He told me he'd been staying at the edge of town. Nothing specific, just enough detail to prove he'd really been there. Watching, waiting. "I didn't want to come too soon," he said, "and I didn't want to come too late." The words settled between us. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I felt their shape. We stopped at the old iron gate where the cemetery met the road. The hinges were rusted through in places, flaking red into the snow. My father used to say, things lasted longer than people. Looking at that gate, I wondered if he'd been wrong. The stranger turned back toward the cemetery, toward the rows of stones, toward my father's. He stood there longer than necessary, like he was measuring something invisible. "I wasn't sure you'd come today," he said. The way he said you caught in my chest, "but I hoped." I followed his gaze, back to the quiet field of white and grey teal, the place where my father rested beneath it all. He took one step toward the road, then stopped, looked back at me once. Not urgent, not pleading, just waiting, and in that pause, I understood this wasn't chance. This wasn't coincidence. Whatever he had been carrying, whatever he had crossed weeks and winters to bring, this was the morning he'd chosen to set it down. The diner was already warm when we stepped inside. Too warm for winter, the windows were fogged, the world outside softened into blur in light. A bell rang over the door. Tired but polite it sounded, like it had been ringing for decades. We took a booth near the window. Vinyl cracked beneath us. The table sticky in a way that never quite goes away. Coffee arrived without asking. Dark. Steaming. The kind that smells stronger than it tastes. He wrapped his hands around the mug and didn't drink. Just watched the steam rise, curl, disappear. I stirred mine once. The spoon clinked too loud. The diner hummed quietly around us. Low voices. A radio murmuring somewhere behind the counter. Plates stacked, time moving forward like it always does. No matter who's ready. I studied his hands when he wasn't looking. The skin was rough, but not careless. Thin scars crossed his knuckles and palms, pale like they'd been there a long time. Not fresh, not accidental, the kind you earn and keep. He noticed my gaze and turned his cup slightly, hiding them. Not defensive, just practice. I never took him for a coffee drinker. He said suddenly, "My father?" I asked. He nodded. A small smile passed over his face. Quick and gone. He said it tasted burnt, he added. But he always finished the cup anyway. That smile stayed with me longer than it should have. I waited, let the moment stretch, then asked the question I'd been carrying since the cemetery. "What's your name?" He didn't look up. The steam kept rising between us, thinning now. Instead, he said, "Your father used to sit like this." He leaned back, one arm along the seat, the other wrapped loose around the mug, like he was never staying long. The deflection was gentle, almost kind, but it landed heavy. "I asked your name," I said. He nodded again, slower this time. His jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. He had this habit, he continued, of fixing things that weren't his: engines, doors, people. The room felt closer then, like the walls had edged in. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. I didn't interrupt. I could tell this was how he spoke when he wasn't ready, sideways, through memory. He never asked for anything back. He said, just said, "You'll know when it's time." I wrapped both hands around my cup, though it had cooled. My father used to say that. I hadn't heard it out loud in years. "Is that why you're here?" I asked quietly. He finally looked up, not at me, past me, like the answer was sitting somewhere behind my shoulder. "Yes," he said, then, after a pause, "Not all of it." Silence settled between us again. Thicker now. The radio clicked to a new song. The waitress passed without stopping. He picked up his cup at last and took a careful sip, winced, set it back down. "You don't have to tell me," I said. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. He met my eyes then. "Just once. Long enough." "I know," he said. "And that's the problem." The steam had faded completely. The coffee sat untouched between us. And I realized whatever his name was, whatever he'd crossed winters to carry here, he wasn't afraid of saying it. He was afraid of what came after. The spoon lay still beside my cup. Coffee had gone untouched long enough to cool. A thin skin forming on the surface outside the diner window. Snow slid from the awning in slow sheets, landing without sound. Inside, the light felt dimmer than before, like the day was folding in on itself. He sat across from me, shoulders forward. Now, as if the story had weight. "It was winter," he said. "Not that winter. Just winter." Like it didn't need explaining. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the mug, didn't look at me yet, everything went wrong. He added dot and no details, just the sentence left open. I waited. The way you wait when you know filling the silence would break something. He took a breath that seemed practiced, like he'd learned how to do it without shaking. It wasn't money, he said finally. That would have been easier. He smiled then, but not with his eyes. I thought of my father's hands, always rough, always busy. The way he'd come home after dark some nights, boots heavy with snow, coat smelling like cold metal and trees. He'd hang it by the door and stand there a moment too long, like he was leaving part of himself outside. He didn't ask questions. The stranger continued. Just listened. Then he said yes. Yes to what? He didn't say. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. A memory surfaced, my father sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner. The house quiet, his chair creaking softly when he leaned back when I'd ask if he was tired. He'd nod, nothing more. He made a promise. The stranger said, and he kept it. The words sat between us, solid and unmovable. It cost him. He added, quieter now, more than he ever told anyone. That was when he looked at me. Really looked. Not past me. Not through me. His eyes carried something unfinished, not guilt, not relief. Something closer to regret that had learned how to live with gratitude. I realized then that the quiet my father carried home wasn't exhaustion. It was restraint. It was choosing not to pass the weight along. What did he give up? I asked. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. I tucked them under the table. The stranger hesitated, just a beat too long. He gave me a way out, he said. When there wasn't one, the diner seemed to pull back, sounds returning in pieces. A cup clinked somewhere. A chair scraped the floor, life insisting on continuing. And in doing that, he went on. He stayed where I couldn't. The words landed softly, but they stayed. I saw my father again, standing in the doorway, watching me leave for things he never followed to. I'd thought it was distance or disinterest. Now I understood it was sacrifice with no witness. The stranger lowered his gaze. His hands were still. I didn't come to undo it, he said. I came to tell you it mattered. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks, softening edges. I looked at him across the table, at the truth finally sitting between us. And I knew this wasn't the end of what my father had left behind. The house didn't recognize us at first. It sat back from the road the way it always had. Porch sagging slightly, windows dulled by years of weather, snow lined the steps and soft ridges, untouched. I unlocked the door and paused, my hand still on the knob, listening. The silence inside felt thicker than the cold outside, like it had been waiting. When the door opened, dust lifted into the light. Slow. Careful. Our breath showed immediately. Pale clouds that faded as soon as they formed. The house was colder than the morning air, as if it had been holding winter inside all along. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Not really. Just quick visits to collect mail, to make sure nothing leaked or fell in. Standing there now, coat still on, I felt like a guest in something that used to be mine. The floor creaked when I stepped forward. Not a complaint, more like recognition. We moved through the front rooms without speaking, past the table where my father used to leave his keys, past the chair with the loose leg no one ever fixed. The stranger walked as if he knew where he was going, though I hadn't told him anything. He stopped near the back of the house. This one, he said quietly. The door was narrow and dark, paint cracked along the frame. I remembered being told to stay out of that room when I was younger. Not angrily, just firmly. I'd obeyed without thinking. The door resisted when I pushed it. Wood swollen from age, from winters pressing in year after year. It opened with a soft groan, like it hadn't been moved in a long time. The air inside smelled different. Paper, old cardboard, something dry and forgotten. Boxes sat stacked along the walls, uneven, dust layered thick enough to dull their edges. Light slipped in through a small window, cutting across them in a narrow band. It felt like stepping into a held breath. He stood back as I walked in. Didn't follow. Just watched. My fingers brushed the top of the nearest box. Dust clung to my skin. I wiped it against my coat without thinking. Most of the boxes were plain, unmarked. Just containers for things that hadn't found a reason to leave. Then I saw it. One box, set apart, smaller than the rest. My father's handwriting along the side, careful, familiar. I knelt slowly, the floor cold even through my jeans. The cardboard creaked. When I pulled it closer, "What's in it?" I asked, though my voice already knew. He didn't answer right away. "Something he didn't want lost," he said finally. I lifted the lid. Inside were papers, folded neatly, a few small objects wrapped in cloth, everything arranged with intention. Not stored, kept. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. The room felt too full for that. Behind me, the stranger shifted his weight, still silent, still waiting. I realized then this wasn't just a room my father had closed off. It was a place he'd left something unfinished, something meant to be found. And as I reached for the first folded page, I understood this house hadn't been empty at all. The paper was thinner than I expected, soft at the edges, folded more times than necessary, like it had been handled, then put away, then handled again. I held it carefully, afraid the sound of unfolding it might feel too loud in the room. The light from the small window caught the page just right. Dust floated through it, slow and unhurried. Behind me, the house settled, a quiet pop in the walls, a reminder it was still standing. My father's handwriting filled the page. Steady, deliberate, and no rush in it at all. I recognized the way he crossed his letters, the slight lean in his lines, as if the words were always moving forward, even when he wasn't sure where they were going. "If you're reading this," it began. I sat back on my heels. The floor was cold, but I didn't shift away from it. He wrote about winter. Not dates, not years. Just the cold. The kind that settles into your bones and stays. He said there were times when doing the right thing didn't look right to anyone else, times when silence felt safer than truth. I glanced over my shoulder. The stranger had turned away, his back to me, one hand braced against the wall. His shoulders were tight, drawn inward like he was holding himself together. My father wrote about a choice. One night, one door, one person standing on the wrong side of town when no one else would answer. He didn't name him. Didn't need to. He wrote that protecting someone meant becoming something the town could misunderstand. That being kind quietly sometimes looked like being wrong out loud. My throat tightened, but the words kept coming. He said the cost wasn't money. It was reputation, belonging, the ease of being seen the same way again. I thought of how my father stopped getting invited to things, how conversations would pause when he entered a room. How he never explained himself. I made the choice anyway. He wrote, because I could live with that. I couldn't live with the other thing. The stranger shifted slightly, didn't turn, didn't speak. Near the end, the handwriting softened. Not messier, just slower. My father wrote about me, about coming home tired and quiet, about knowing I noticed, about wanting to explain but choosing not to, because some truths ask too much of the people we love. "I'm sorry," he wrote, "for the weight I carried without letting you help, for the questions I left you with. I hope one day you'd understand why I stayed silent." The letter ended there. No signature, just a faint indent where the pen had rested too long. I lowered the page into my lap. The room felt smaller now, not closing in, just full. Behind me, the stranger let out a breath he'd been holding. I didn't ask him anything. I didn't need to. I folded the letter again, carefully, along the same lines my father had made, and for the first time since his death, I understood that the quiet he left behind wasn't absence. It was protection, and the truth he hid was never meant to stay buried forever. The house made a low sound when he finally spoke. Not a creak, not a sigh. Something in between, like the walls were settling into a truth they'd been holding for years. "My name is Daniel," he said. He said it once, didn't repeat it, didn't wait to see how it landed. The name didn't echo the way I expected. It didn't attach itself to anything familiar. It just existed between us, steady and plain. I nodded, not because it meant something yet, but because it felt right to let it stay. He turned toward me fully then, not guarded anymore. "Just tired." "I'm not family," he said. "Not the way people mean it." The light from the window cut across his face, stopping just short of his eyes. He rubbed his hands together once, slow, like warmth was something he remembered rather than felt. "But your father," he paused, swallowed. "Your father chose me." The word chose stayed with me. He told me about a winter that didn't forgive mistakes, about being young and already written off, about knocking on doors that stayed closed. When he spoke of that time, his voice didn't shake. It flattened, like a road worn down by years of travel. He didn't ask where I came from, Daniel said. Didn't ask what I'd done. He smiled then. Brief. Not with his eyes. He asked what I needed to stop running. I pictured my father standing in the same room, hands in his pockets, listening without interrupting, the way he used to listen to me when I didn't know how to ask for help. "He gave me work," Daniel continued. "A place to sleep, a way to start again without having to explain myself to the whole town." I felt something shift in my chest. Grief, yes, but also pride, and something sharper than both. "How long?" I asked quietly. He thought about it, then shook his head. "Long enough to change me," he said, "not long enough to thank him properly." The room seemed to hum then, not loud, just alive. Like all the unsaid things had leaned closer, I realized how little of my father's life I had truly seen. How many moments had passed while I was elsewhere, believing I knew him completely. Daniel looked around the room. The boxes, the dust, the narrow light. He never wanted credit, he said. He told me if anyone asked, to say I figured it out myself. That sounded like my father. Leaving quietly, letting others believe what they needed to. I imagined all the lives that might have brushed against his small intersections, unrecorded kindnesses, the kind that never make noise. Daniel's voice softened. "I'm only one," he said. I looked at him then, really looked. And I understood something my father never said out loud, that love doesn't always stay where it starts, that family isn't always named, and that some men plant themselves in other people's winters, so something can grow later. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't empty anymore. And I wondered how many others were still out there, carrying pieces of my father I was only just beginning to see. The evening came on quietly. No announcement. Just a soft dimming, like someone lowering a lamp one notch at a time. Storefront lights flickered awake as we walked, their reflections stretching thin across the sidewalk. The air smelled faintly of snow and old brick. Somewhere behind us, a door closed. Somewhere ahead, a radio played low and steady. We walked without hurry. The town moved around us the way it always had. People finishing their days, coats pulled close, heads down. I had walked these streets my whole life. Or so I thought. Daniel slowed near the hardware store. The windows were dark now, but I could still see the outline of shelves inside. "He fixed the back door here once," he said. "They were going to replace it. He said it just needed patience." I pictured my father with his tools, kneeling, not rushing, taking his time where others wouldn't. We passed the post office. The small bench out front was dusted with snow. "He waited with Mrs. Calder every morning," Daniel said. "She couldn't stand long. He never said why he was late getting to work. I remembered mornings when my father left early and came home later than expected. I'd never ask where the time went. We crossed the street. The old cafe glowed warm inside, silhouettes moving behind the glass. He paid for a man's breakfast there once. Daniel said, didn't look back to see if he ate it. Each place he pointed to felt like a quiet reveal, not secrets exactly. Just moments no one had thought to name. As we walked, the town changed shape, not physically, but emotionally. Corners softened, distances shortened. I realized how little I truly knew about the man who raised me, not because he hid himself, but because he moved through the world without leaving noise behind. I'd known his routines, his rules, not his reach. Daniel stopped once more, near the edge of town where the road bent gently toward the cemetery. The iron gate was just visible, now, dark against the fading light. He didn't need thanks, Daniel said. He needed things to be fair, even when they weren't. The word fair stayed with me. We stood there, the town humming softly behind us. A car passed. Someone laughed somewhere down the block. Life continued, unaware of the shift happening quietly inside me. I looked toward the cemetery, toward the place where truths eventually settle. What happens now? I asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He watched the lights come on one by one, like stars learning their places. Now, he said, you carry it. I understood then that justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it doesn't correct anything outward at all. Sometimes it only changes how you see what's already there. The town didn't look smaller anymore. It looked fuller. As we turned back toward the road, I glanced once more at the cemetery gate, and I wondered if knowing the truth wasn't about setting things right, but about finally seeing how much good had been done, without anyone ever asking to be remembered for it. Snow began to fall again as we reached the cemetery. Not the sharp kind that stings your face. This was softer, quieter. Each flake drifting down like it had nowhere else to be. The gate stood open, just enough, iron cold beneath my palm. The path was already filling in behind us, our footprints fading as quickly as they appeared. It felt intentional, like the ground was giving us privacy. My father's grave waited where it always had. Simple, unadorned. The stone looked different now, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way I was seeing it. Maybe it was because I finally knew who else had been standing here when I wasn't. Daniel stopped first. He took the letter from his coat slowly, like it might change its mind and disappear. The paper was folded again, careful, respectful. He knelt and placed it at the base of the stone, weighing it down with a small rock he picked from the ground. Not ceremonious, just enough to keep it from moving. He bowed his head. I never said thank you, he said. His voice carried easily in the open air. Not loud. Just honest. I didn't know how, he continued. And you never asked me to. The wind moved through the trees then, branches brushing together, shedding snow in soft cascades. It sounded like breathing, a long, steady exhale. Daniel cleared his throat once. Just once. I tried to live it right, he said. I hope that counted for something. His voice broke there. Not fully. Just a fracture. Enough to let the truth show through. He stood and stepped back, giving the grave space again, giving my father the respect of silence. I moved closer. The stone was cold beneath my glove, the letters, sharp and familiar. My father's name. The dates that always felt too close together. I felt the loss settle in the same place it always had, but this time, it wasn't alone. Pride rose alongside it. Quiet. Unshowy, the kind my father would have preferred. I thought of all the winters he'd stood firm while others turned away, of the choices that never made headlines, of the good done quietly, without witnesses. Snow gathered on the letter at the base of the stone, on the rock, on our shoulders. Neither of us brushed it away. We stood there together. Two people shaped by the same man in different ways, bound not by blood, but by something steadier, something earned. The wind passed through again, gentler now. The trees swayed. The cemetery held us without asking anything in return. I wondered then if this was the ending, if stories like this ever really end, or if they simply soften into memory, settling where they're needed, waiting for the next person to stand still long enough to listen. I looked once more at my father's name, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving him behind. The morning came quietly, and no knock, and no goodbye waiting at the door. Just a pale strip of light along the edge of the sky and the sound of a car starting somewhere down the street. By the time I looked out the window, the road was already empty, snow filled in where tires had been. Whatever brought him here had finished its work. I stood there longer than I needed to. The house was still, too still, the kind of stillness that listens back. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside. Cold met me without resistance, familiar now. The air smelled clean, like something had been cleared away overnight. The cemetery gate was half buried when I reached it. Snow had softened everything, edges, paths, intention. Our footprints from yesterday were gone. Not faded. Gone completely. I walked alone this time. No one beside me. No one pointing or explaining. Just the sound of my steps and my breath moving together. My father's grave came into view slowly. The stone stood steady. Snow gathered along its top like a quiet offering. At the base, the letter was gone, covered fully now, indistinguishable from the ground around it. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, didn't kneel, didn't speak. The loss was still there. It always would be. But it no longer pressed down the way it used to. It moved. I thought of all the years I believed silence meant absence, how I mistook my father's quiet for distance, how easy it is to miss what doesn't announce itself. His secret didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like breath, like something that had been waiting for air. I realized then that truth doesn't always arrive when we're ready. Sometimes it comes after the door has closed, after the question has settled, after the person who could explain is no longer here, and still it matters. I brushed snow from the edge of the stone with my glove. Not all of it, just enough to see his name clearly. I see it now, I said, barely louder than the wind. The trees stirred gently, shedding snow in soft drops. And no answer came back. None was needed. As I turned to leave, the cemetery didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like a point of origin, a quiet center from which something could move forward. Walking away, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because the past had changed, but because my understanding of it had. I knew I would carry this differently now, not as a story to tell loudly, but as a way of moving through the world, with patience, with restraint, with a willingness to stand where others won't. The winter air bit at my face, but it didn't feel endless anymore. Just seasonal. Just passing. I reached the gate and paused once more. Somewhere behind me, snow continued to fall, softly, persistently. And as I stepped back into the road, I knew exactly what I would carry forward, not the secret itself, but the quiet courage it took to keep it.